Hello.
I'll just refresh.
Obviously, there's always a bit of a lag, but.
Yeah, you're live.
Oh, wow. Only took us 33 minutes. Anyway.
Right.
Hello. Welcome to the live stream with the Senior Tutor. Lucinda, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Lucinda. I'm the Senior Tutor and Tutor Admissions. Still, I think, yes.
Yeah.
And an English tutor, but happy to answer any questions about anything related to admissions.
And I'm Sarah, the Active Officer at Mansfield. So this has taken a very long time. So I think we'll probably go on till like 1 instead of 1:45, just so we can try and answer some of the questions that we had. So to begin with, Lucinda, do you mind just talking us through like kind of what's, obviously with the coronavirus and lockdowns and things, how has the application process changed, but also kind of how is it the same in terms of the overview, just for people who have some concerns that everything's going to be totally different?
Yeah. Okay. So the thing that's changed is that everything is going to be online. So everybody's interviews are going to be online. And the process is the same, so that students apply through UCAS. There are tests. The tests are spread out over 2 days in order to give people the chance to spread out over wider spaces so that they can keep their 2 meters distance. So all of the kind of way in which you apply is going on the same. But we're not going to invite candidates to come to Oxford because we don't think it's safe to do that with lots of people coming and going. So one of the things going to happen is going to be a bit more stuff arranged in advance. So people's interviews arranged in advance and possibly over a slightly longer period in order to give time to people to be able to set up interviews in their schools or colleges. So all that stuff we will give more information about as we get more of it sorted out, because obviously until a little while ago we thought we were all going to be doing this as normal. So just watch out on the admissions website, Oxford Admissions website, about how things are slightly altered, but just carry on with UCAS application as normal. And obviously we're kind of aware of that people are applying under really difficult and different circumstances, so we're taking that into account.
So obviously you mentioned the main big difference is that interviews will be online. So does that mean people have to prepare in like a radically different way? Are they going to be asked different kinds of questions, just in terms of like the logistics, not just the logistics, but the actual interview? How will that be different, or are people kind of advised to continue preparing as they might have done before?
I think you should prepare as you have before for people who are applying, and think about the same kinds of things, you know, kind of doing bits of extra research, doing sort of wider reading, kind of refreshing material that you're doing in school and college or have done in school and college, so that you kind of just feel kind of comfortable and familiar with the kind of the basic stuff that you might need in any interview. So in that way, I think behave the same. I suppose it would be a good idea to practice doing it online. So I often say to people, you know, practice first with a friend. And now if you did that like on Teams or Zoom or something, and you tried interviewing each other online instead of sitting down and doing that face to face, then that probably is a good way of thinking about it, because just a few things are different in the way that you react. I think, you know, it feels slightly more kind of contained and formal when you're online, I think. So just get used to doing it that way rather than doing it face to face, I think. But loads of the things are the same. And one of the things lots of tutors have said, we've all obviously been teaching online all over the summer, you know, kind of until the summer vacation. And lots of our science tutors who used to find it, you know, kind of, they used to have to think really hard about how to do Skype interviews, now feel they've got loads more experience of doing stuff online with their own science students, which means that they'll be able to do more kind of interesting and engaging things in interviews than they did in the past, just because of having more experience doing that. And also loads of the facilities and resources are better now that we've all had to kind of move our education online. So I think lots of the things will be the same, and it will be, what's behind it will be the same, trying to get people to work out new problems, apply what they know to sort of new and difficult things, helping people along to kind of work out answers to problems, and have a kind of a conversation rather than a, question and answer, formal question and answer. So I think loads of things will be really quite similar.
And so how does the shortlisting for interviews work? Like, what sorts of things are you looking at when deciding who to invite for interview and who not to invite?
So I think, those things will be as normal. So there will be the UCAS form, and that will obviously have the qualifications and the teacher's reference and the personal statement. And we also have lots of information that kind of contextualizes every candidate. So tells us whether loads of people in the area where you live are going into higher education, tells us something about the kind of financial circumstances in your area. So contextual data which we're able to take into account whilst looking at the other information about performance, your own academic performance and your school's academic performance. All of that is kind of there for us to look at. We'll also, for most people, have a test result as well. And then at the end of that, the interview is the thing where we do the kind of more precise assessment on the top of all of that other information that we've got. For some people, there'll still be written work to submit. So shortlisting, in different subjects, different things happen. So different bits of information are kind of might be weighted a bit more heavily than in others. But basically having that kind of like gathering of all of that information, and then the tutors looking very carefully at all that information and shortlisting people who've got really good positives. So if one thing is negative, then that's not a big deal. But if, as the negatives stack up, then you're less likely to get interviewed. As the positives stack up, you're more likely to get interviewed. And I think this year particularly, we all know people have been out of education for a long time. We all know that, kind of it's been a really difficult sort of home situation for loads of people. So we're thinking really carefully about that and taking that into account. And in your personal statement and in the reference, it's good to hear the situation in which you've been trying to work academically kind of since March. And
we've had a question about along the lines of taking things into account. Do you take into consideration that, some people who have gone to schools that don't send lots of people to Oxford or Cambridge might not have had mock interviews? And, is there something in place where students have to state if they've had a mock interview so that they can get assessed fairly? How does that work?
That's a really good question. I think we would think of whether somebody's had a mock interview or not as being one bit of the kind of help with application, the kind of larger thing. So I think it's much wider than having a mock interview. It's all of the kind of help and preparation that students might have in some schools that they don't in others. So we are really aware that candidates will come into the interview with really different experience. And actually, we're pretty practiced at picking up when people are sort of very trained. That can actually sometimes be a real disadvantage because they might kind of be ready to answer a particular way and rather surprised that they're not being asked things in the way that they expected from all the practice they've been doing. So we are really attentive to that and think about that carefully in every year. And we're aware that things where a student hasn't, in a normal year, a student from a particular school might not have had much preparation, that will be even more so. So we can see the gap's going to be bigger this year. And so we're thinking a lot about that. And I guess as a kind of comfort, students who haven't had a mock interview should think it's not so much sort of how you perform in an interview, it's sort of what you've sort of got in your repertoire to say. And so one thing that a colleague said to me the other day is that students who've been in this really difficult situation have been really pushed to work independently because they've not had loads of help. And so students who've really enjoyed finding out stuff by themselves, doing a bit of research by themselves, where they haven't been working to their same sort of tight kind of A-level or qualification program, might have actually discovered some things which would be brilliant for them to talk about in interviews. So there are some ways in which using that extra time could make you kind of a better candidate. So try and think positively about the things that you've done when you haven't been able to be taught, and think of that as quite a positive thing. We are. And
have you got any advice for calming pre-interview nerves, particularly if you haven't had lots of opportunities to practice talking to someone who you're not really familiar with about your subject?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, we get really nervous before the interviews, and I think I'm going to be more nervous interviewing online because it just feels a bit different. So I think the first thing is something I said a little bit earlier, kind of like practice with somebody first, with somebody who's really familiar. When do interview someone else. So if you've got a friend who's going to apply to, even if they're applying to university and they're just finishing off the personal statement, do a little interview with them, just online, and ask them questions about why they want to study what they study. Ask each other those questions. Keep saying to them, can you give me an example of why you want to study this thing? Can you give me an example of a book you've read or a problem you've tried? And see and practice that kind of explaining examples to each other, because almost every question I ask an interview is, can you give me an example of that? So practice that. Do something like write yourself a 5-minute talk on a little piece of research in relation to the subject you want to apply for, and deliver it to your family at dinner. Just say to them, I'm going to sit you down here and I'm going to tell you about this thing. And obviously we wouldn't expect you in an interview to stand up and talk for 5 minutes, but just the practice of kind of finding some words to say about the thing can be really good for you. And you might find in the interview that having that in your head, even though that's not something you're actually going to say, sort of makes you feel a little bit more confident about, I know this thing. If somebody asks me this question, I'm ready with that answer. So I would say do that. Just to go over a little bit work that you've done recently, particularly as some of it might feel a little bit, kind of shaky because of not having so much time in school. So look back at things like even GCSE stuff, which, might feel a bit comforting and give you your sort of sound foundations for looking at some of the kind of science things. I think most things about, and also try to think we are human and we are kind of worried about people feeling nervous. We're worried about how much people have missed. We've got students turning up in 2 weeks time, just over, who we know we're going to have to give them loads more support because they've been out of education and they've had really difficult circumstances. So all of that we're prepared for, and we'll have done that for a term, and then we'll be seeing you. So, that is going to help us to be kind of really ready and recognize the signs when we're chatting to you. So, so try not to think that we're like ogres and horrible. We're actually quite nice and friendly and normal. And you were interviewed, Sarah. It was normal, wasn't it? It was all right.
Yeah, I found it quite fun. It's kind of, you don't, up until that point, you don't often get the opportunity to talk about your subject and, be probed on it. It's not kind of an antagonistic question and answer session. It's more an opportunity for you to kind of think through a question with the tutor. And I think up until I came to my interview, I wasn't sure whether I would take my place, but after I came, I was like, oh, that was really fun. I think, maybe I would enjoy coming here and learning in that way, because the tutorial system can be quite similar to the interviews, although much less intense, of course.
Yeah. I think there's a thing we're going to have to think about, how students who are current students get involved in the interview process, because usually if students are coming for a couple of days to Oxford, they will be in their room and they will talk to current students who look after them, and so they'll have a chance to really kind of settle in and live in the college for a bit. So we're going to use our helpers and do you know this yet, Sarah? Have kind of like pre-interview sessions where you can talk and ask questions of people, just to give you a little bit of kind of like familiarity with what it's like every day to be a student as well.
And so we've also got a question, which is, will colleges still be pooling students at interview, and how will this work? I think you touched on this a bit earlier, but could you just say a bit more about it?
Yeah, I think we're going to try and do a little bit of planning, kind of, so because we'll have to schedule interviews, and obviously schools, it might be difficult for schools to kind of get interviews in place for when, you know, we want the candidate to be there and they can manage and stuff. So we might do a bit of scheduling a little bit earlier, and there might be a little bit of a gap as well. So you might have your first interview, and then there might be a little bit of shuffling around while we sort out, for those people who don't automatically have 2 interviews set up right at the beginning, which lots of sciences do. So we'll be trying to plan a little bit more ahead, and then maybe there'll be a little gap, and then a second lot of interviews when people have had their first lot and we've been able to sort of do a little bit of assessment. So students will still be go and have interviews at other colleges remotely. We will still do open offers, and one of the things that open offers is really great for is that, you know, you're getting lots of chances to be seen by all the tutors who are interviewing in that subject, and so they're looking at candidates and making sure the best people get picked. So that's all going on as before. And
you mentioned like open applications. Obviously, we'd like everyone to apply to Mansfield because it's the best college. But could you say a bit about kind of what Mansfield is like, both from the tutor perspective, but also for students? Obviously, there'll be more opportunities to hear from the students this afternoon about what it's like to be a student. But you know, why should people apply to Mansfield?
Well, I think, so Mansfield's kind of little, and it's over 90% state, and so it feels very much, to me, it feels a bit like kind of like the normal world being brought into a really kind of academic environment. So people from all different kinds of schools. We have students from all over the world, which I think is really good for us. You know, people coming from lots of different educational experiences. So those things make this really nice community. The smallness means that I think it's very friendly. One of the kind of sad things at the moment is that we're obviously trying to set up everybody coming back under these really kind of odd conditions, because we've got, you know, kind of like households of 6, and you know, between sort of 6 and 8 people, and we've got you know, we would usually have loads of kitchens open, and they're closed at the moment, so our students can't cook for themselves. So lots of the things that I think are kind of lovely about the way Mansfield works are kind of restricted at the moment for people starting their first year. But generally speaking, it's a beautiful stone building that looks like a castle, and the tutors are really nice. They're really engaged with their subjects, they're really geeky about their subjects. The food is great. We're bang in the middle of town, so it's really easy to get everywhere. You could do like a step from the shops and a step from the parks and the river and the ducks and things. So I think it's got a really good caring feel. So we've recently put quite a lot of resources into extra academic support for students, and we did that last year, and we're just so glad we've got it in place for this year already, because we think students are going to need more support. So I think it's a supportive, small, friendly, normal environment with good food, I would say. Nice accommodation too. Everybody gets accommodation for all the years of their course, so that's good too.
Could you tell us a bit more about the kind of academic and welfare support that the students at Mansfield get? Because I know that's something people worry about.
Sure. Yeah, so the welfare support, there's a kind of university-wide support counselling service and disability service, and all of the kind of larger, more sort of formalised support services are all there in place. But then so you kind of could liaise with a person where on both of those things at the same time. And I find as senior tutor, I see students a lot when things are not always going perfectly. And one of the things I notice is that very often academic issues arise out of the fact that people have other unhappinesses and difficulties. So, if they're struggling with their work, they're unhappy. If they're unhappy, they're often struggling with their work. So there is quite a lot of overlap of those things. And so we've got Gail, who's a wonderful tutor, who's our welfare tutor and an academic support tutor. Every subject has also got its own little things which it does to kind of support students when they're starting in the first year. And one of our law tutors was saying she's going to kind of record little clips of difficult questions people find so awkward in law that she's going to record them so people can just watch them as many times as they want. So we've got people thinking about that, kind of giving people a sort of store of helpful guidance. We do lots of induction. And just university-wide, I think it's such a sort of personal thing. Having meetings with your tutors, it's, your tutor pretty well. They know how you work. They can see easily when you're struggling because you see them really regularly and you're seeing them just with small groups. So I think all of those things go to make it supportive, but also very challenging. It's kind of that enables us to work you really hard as well. So it kind of works in both ways.
Yeah, I think that's true. Kind of partly you feel well supported because you know your tutors so well. So we've got a question which is, will modern languages be available at Mansfield for 2022 entry? I'm a little intimidated by other lower state proportion at other colleges. So they'd really like to come to Mansfield.
I would love to put modern languages on just for you, student. When we can't, I'm afraid. It takes a long time to set up doing, particularly modern languages, because you need a really good library and you need tutors to teach quite a range of subjects. But there are loads of lovely colleges that do modern languages. Most colleges do it. And you shouldn't worry. I mean, there are other colleges which are up in the kind of, they're within, 10, 15% of our state numbers. So, have a look around at some of the other colleges and talk to some of the kind of, there'll be modern languages students online at the moment, and say, find the one where you chat to people and you feel most comfortable. There are colleges out. We do Oriental studies, so we do Arabic, Hebrew, but they're the only languages we do, other than under theology and religion. We do Greek and lots of languages there. But I'm sorry, we're quite small. We can't take that many subjects. It's a shame.
And finally, what advice? So we'll see if anyone has any final questions. Please ask them. But while we wait for those, what advice do you have for people who are applying? So obviously it's September, so the UCAS deadline is almost upon us.
Yeah.
But what kind of things can people be doing to prepare, whether it's for finishing their personal statement or the admissions test, and then obviously for interviews?
Okay, so the things I said about practicing talking a bit about your subject to friends, and then, if you get the opportunity to do that with a teacher, then that's great. But practicing saying stuff out loud, I think, is quite good for you, because there's that first embarrassing thing when you kind of think, I feel like an idiot. I feel like I'm saying something really stupid and I can't think of the word. And even if you do it 3 or 4 times until when you say something, it feels a little bit more comfortable. I remember once doing an interview when I was preparing, and I kind of thought, I'm going to kind of learn a paragraph off by heart in my head. And I didn't use that paragraph, but just sort of trying to say something like that made me think, I can string words together. I can make sense. I'm really bad at interviews. So the practicing. For your personal statement, read through it and try and think, does it both say what I'm enjoying that I'm studying at the moment, what is kind of makes me really interested in studying more difficult stuff, what's some examples of difficult stuff I've tried, read, tried out, what do I want to do next? And see whether, if you haven't finished your personal statement, if there's a little bit next that you can do, one more thing. And try to think, I said earlier, try to think being being in lockdown and all the kind of bad things, think of one good academic thing that's come out of that, and some kind of positive thing where you've been sitting by yourself and you've been searching online and you've gone 5 clicks and you found something just amazing, and that moment when you thought, I could find out more about that. So try and get that into your personal statement, and try not only to think everything has been gloomy, because actually lots of people have done some stuff on their own which has been really positive in lockdown. Think a little bit, I don't know, silly things, like think a little bit about, how did living in lockdown relate to the subject I study? How does it relate to physics? How does it relate to law? You know, so have a little think about that, because that's, you know, just an interesting question for you to debate with yourself. Write to us and we'll respond to your, you know, write to us in Slido and we'll respond to you if you give us examples, or we'll give you examples if you want. For tests, there's lots of tests online, and some guidance. Practice them. Practice first a test. Don't do more than 3 goes, but say something like that. So you can't spend all your time practicing tests. And if you practice 100 times, you're not going to get 100 times better. But you could try practice a test quite slowly and then try speeding it up. Because the thing that people find most difficult is answering all of the questions and in the time. That's when it starts to get more difficult. So lots of people can do it if they do it slowly. The other thing is, there's a lovely maths tutor at Mansfield, Janet, who says that when students look at tests, she thinks it's the way in which they divide slightly between, they see a question they don't know and they think, I can't do that question, that's a stupid question. You know, why are you asking me this question? They feel a bit indignant, cross. That's a bad thing to do, because if you don't answer the question, you can't get the mark. The other is, that's a question I can't do, I'm stupid. That's also a bad way of approaching it, because if you don't try it, you're not going to know. And if in those circumstances you look at something and you absolutely have no idea at all, just think, I have learned so much over the last few years. What can I throw at this question that I could use? Because they expect lots of those questions for you not to know the answer, but they want to see how you use what you know. And that's exactly the same in interviews. So just think, in my head, I've got a brain the size of a planet. I can do this. I have kind of loads of information in my head. What could I use? And you will come to interesting and fascinating kind of answers. And that basically is what being a university is about. So just do that, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. You know, just having a go is really important.
Yeah.
Because, you know, in interview, when they ask you questions, they don't expect you to come out with a fully formed answer. And actually not being willing to have a go will look worse than having a go and getting it wrong.
Absolutely, yeah.
And even with, you know, if you're thinking, oh, I don't know whether to apply, I'm not sure if I'll get in, it's always worth kind of having a go. One of your 5 choices on UCAS. And it can really help you learn a lot more about your subject, and kind of make you realize that it is or isn't the subject that you want to study. So
absolutely, yeah. And the whole process just makes you cleverer. So anything that you do to write your personal statement, to read an extra article, to talk to somebody else about your subject, just makes you a little bit cleverer. And if you decide that you don't want to apply to Oxford, or you decide that you don't want to apply to university yet, you're still that little bit clever, and that all gives you more choices. Cleverer you are, happier you are.
Absolutely.
So
I don't think we have any further questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry for all of the technical delays. Hopefully we'll get it together before the student Q&A at 2 o'clock. But yeah, if you do have any further questions, you can always put them in the Slido. We are answering questions until 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
But thank you for watching. Thanks, Lucinda.
And thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Helen, for fielding the questions. Do you want to come on, Helen, and say hello, Helen, and wave at us? Just to say goodbye.
No, that's fine.
Come on, say goodbye. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everybody, for your questions. They're great. It's just loading. I hope.
Okay, cool. We're ready to go live. I haven't pressed go live on YouTube yet, but I think I probably will now. So is everyone happy with that? Okay, great. Helen, will you check if it's worked? I think this means we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our current students Q&A. I'm Sarah, I'm the Access Officer, and I have some student helpers who are going to introduce themselves and then answer any of your questions. Please just put your questions on the page, on the Slido as we go along, and we'll try and answer them. So I'll hand over to the student helpers to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Sridhar Kirti. I'm a second-year history student at Mansfield.
Hi, I'm Femi. I'm a third-year material scientist at Mansfield.
Hi, I'm Ava. I'm a second-year PPEist at Mansfield.
Hi, I'm Eve. I'm a second-year lawyer at Mansfield.
Great. Sorry about that. Great, thank you all. So the first question we had was, what criteria should people use when they're thinking about choosing a college? So obviously there's lots of different colleges. It could be quite hard to narrow it down. So should they keep kind of in mind things like places offered, particular interest of tutors, like the size? It'll be interesting to know kind of how you narrowed it down and what made you choose Mansfield or whichever college you chose to apply to. Shall we start with Shrutkriti?
I actually had an open application, so I only got interviewed at Mansfield. But I'm really happy to be here. It is an amazing college, and I think that really it is like one of the smaller colleges, but I think that's what makes it so good, because you know everyone that you are with, and you make friends really easily, and it's a very lovely community to be a part of.
I would say that for me, I kind of decided on like the vibe of the college when I went there on the open day. So like what the people were like, and yeah, just how I felt at the place. But other things I would have considered if I could go back in time, probably would be like how close the college is to the department. Luckily, Mansfield is very close to the material science department. And then accommodation price as well, because it varies from college to college, and some places have the same price of accommodation for every room, and some colleges don't. So that's one of the things I would have taken into account.
So I actually applied to Brasenose and not Mansfield, but luckily I think that they're quite similar, so I was really happy where I ended up anyway. And you do definitely end up loving any college you do end up in. But I went to quite a central college. I didn't want one of the massive bigger colleges, and also I wanted like quite a big cohort of people doing my subject. Some people prefer less people, but I kind of like the idea of a big group of us doing the same subject at the college.
I chose Mansfield because of all the access work they do. So I did some access-based like summer schools, and I got to go into Mansfield and meet the people. And I really loved the vibe and how welcoming everybody was. So it was really like the only college I considered applying to. But it's also good because it's really close to the law faculty. So it's not a long walk when you've got an early morning session.
And we've got a question, which is, how did you find settling in and kind of your first few weeks at Oxford when you arrived?
I think it was quite hard, but not really because of Oxford. It was just weird being away from home for me. But I think that, like I said, it is like one of the smaller colleges. So like I think like by the end of freshers week, you sort of knew everyone, and it is like it feels very community minded, and like, you know, there's the crypt and everyone's always in the crypt, which we'll see what happens this year, but that's always really nice. And it was it's nice that you know everyone and you can just say hi.
In terms of like academic work, I found it quite difficult, like settling in, because we were getting lots of problem sheets, and it was so different to A levels, and the fact that like with A levels you just answer like 95% of the questions and think like, okay, sweet. And then I was getting to the problem sheets and I was like struggling on question 1A. So doing that for like a couple of weeks, it took a bit of time to like, you know, get used to the work and like the type of questions they were asking. But because everyone that was doing my subject kind of like helped me out, and the people in the year above also like gave tips and tricks to answer problem sheets. So after a couple of weeks, it was fine, and yeah, it felt really nicely.
Yeah, I would say the same, Shruti, really. There's like a really nice community, and especially in first year, you're all kind of, as you'll find this year especially, you're kind of very much like put in your blocks, and it's very, you do kind of really get to know the people you're living with quite easily. And that makes it much easier in the first few weeks. Like, as Fami said, you do have a lot of work, but so much of that is you do kind of get used to it pretty quick, and you can complain to like all the people you're living with and they just deal with it, and it's really friendly.
I think for me, Freshers Week, I got a little bit overwhelmed, and I tend to overthink things, like the imposter syndrome. But then within like 2 or 3 weeks, I absolutely loved it, because Mansfield's so small. I'm like best friends with everyone on my course. So it was really lovely. After a few weeks, I really settled in.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a really good point about Freshers Week. It can often like be really built up and hyped up. So it, you know, you're meeting so many new people, you have so much new work, you're in like a new environment because, you know, you move out. And so it can be like quite an adjustment, but you know, there's more to the first term and the first year than just the Freshers Week. We've got another question. What's the diversity of Mansfield like?
I find this a very weird question for me because I live in Scotland. So when I moved down to Oxford, I was like, oh, this is great, wow. But I know that, like, you know, I mean, obviously there's a lot, Oxford does get a lot of flack for access issues and all of that, which are completely valid. Just in my personal experience, I find Mansfield really does its best in trying to reach out to students from all different backgrounds, whether that's due to, like, I mean, like educational access to do with class or race or, you know, but yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the better colleges and doing all it can for access. So yeah.
Yeah, I also agree. I would say in terms of like the type of people that you meet, there's lots of diversity in that. In terms of race, is better than most colleges. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on the matter.
Does anyone else have anything to say? Is Mansfield being small a benefit? Because I know lots of people talk about the kind of size of Mansfield. Have you found that to be a good thing, or?
I would say we kind of touched on it earlier, but especially when you first get there, the fact that it's a bit smaller means you don't get maybe as overwhelmed as quickly. Whereas I think I would feel myself if I come from quite a rural area, so like my school was quite small. So if I'd have suddenly ended up in one of the bigger colleges, I'd have been quite overwhelmed. But the size of the college kind of makes it very easy to feel kind of at home quicker, because it's very like familiar very quickly, I think.
We've got, what was your interview like? What were you most afraid of?
I only had 2 interviews, but you know, sometimes you get, I think that is standard for a lot of subjects, but you do get pooled, so sometimes you're more than that. I don't really, I can't remember what I was most afraid of. I was just afraid of the whole thing. It was super weird being away from high school and being in Oxford. It was the first time I'd been in Oxford. So it was like, I mean, you know, I think it was intimidating and I was nervous, but I think that those are very natural feelings in that environment, and you know, kind of question yourself. But I don't know, I just went into my interview kind of thinking that, you know, I'll give it my best shot and see what happens. Yeah.
I would say that for my interviews were like, they were okay. I didn't come out thinking that they were amazing, but I didn't come out thinking that they were terrible either. I was just like content. And I think the thing I was most afraid of was just looking stupid in front of the professors. I feel like everyone gets that where they're scared they're going to say the wrong thing. But I feel like you have to like make sure that you do say whatever's on your mind, even if you think it could be the wrong thing, because you never know, it might be right. And they're more interested in seeing your thought process. So if the thing that you said isn't quite exactly right, but it's along the right lines, then they'll be more pleased with that than you not saying anything at all. But you don't also have to feel like you have to be confident, because they're quite accommodating of whatever personality that comes through the door. So I would just say, like, be yourself, but speak your mind also.
Yeah, I'm much the same. I had 2 interviews at Brasenose, my original college, and then 2 at Mansfield as well. And I would definitely say, like, the first 2 I did, I walked out feeling horrific. I was like, oh, this is awful. They think I'm really silly. But genuinely looking back, like, it's how a lot of tutorials go, and that they just want to hear what you think about things. So if you just, as Fami said, speak your mind, they're not gonna think you're silly or think you're stupid or think you don't know what you're talking about, because they just want to see how your brain works.
I think for me, like it was a lot of pressure because I really wanted to do well, so I didn't really take a step back. Like I thought I was awful. I thought it was the worst thing I'd ever done, which it obviously wasn't. So I think just taking the time to realize it's not the end of the world, because you won't know how you've done. You could think you were amazing, or you could think it was really awful. So that's one of my biggest tips, because I thought about it for the whole of Christmas. Was it good enough? But yeah.
If you're on a gap year, does that affect your chances of getting in?
I don't think so. I mean, I have friends at other colleges who've been on gap years, and you know, I mean, they'll apply and it's fine. I don't think it's even something that people really notice that much. I mean, you can talk about it on your personal statement if you want to, if you think it's relevant, but I don't think that it affects your chances of getting in, like, either way.
Yeah, I think for some of the more sciencey and mathsy subjects, they'd like to see evidence that you've kind of kept up your maths during your gap year. So if you're kind of putting an application together, be sure to show evidence of that. But kind of taking a gap year in and of itself doesn't affect your chances most of the time, except obviously, as I said, in maths and science subjects, if you haven't been able to keep your maths up. We've got, what's the ratio of boys to girls? I mean, you guys might not have specific numbers, but kind of how does it feel? I don't know.
I think well, from the Zoom call, it seems to be more girls than boys, but that's what it feels like at college as well. That is more girls than boys. Apparently, like, girls are smarter than boys throughout school, so that must be the reason why.
I mean, I can't say that I really know this college-wide, and I think it also varies year from year. I think, like, I mean, in my cohort of history students, like, there's only 2 girls, including me. But you know, other years are not the same. But I guess it's pretty equal.
Oh, we've got a question for you, Shrikiti. Coming from Scotland, how did you find the transition?
I don't like. Well, I mean, I think it is definitely different from what I was used to. I like, well, but you know, it was nice. And it was great. I think that I found it difficult academically, because I think that the kind of way I was taught in high school. The way I wrote essays and the way I thought about things just changed completely in like my first term. And I think that was hard getting used to that. But I also think that that's something probably a lot of students would go through as well. But I would say that, I mean, in terms of culturally, there are lots of like societies, and I think that there's more access work going on right now with like Clydeside Project and places like that are being run by Scottish students, like within Oxford and I think within the wider university. So, I mean, I don't know, don't worry about missing home. You will find like, people who, are from the same places as you are.
We've got, is accommodation offered on site for all 3 years? And are ensuite rooms available for all 3 years? Anyone can answer.
So in first year you live on site, as I said earlier, and like freshers are generally in blocks together. In second year there's a room ballot. So if you're at the top of the ballot, you kind of get first choice of the room, and there's some rooms on site and off site that you choose from. And then the ballot is flipped in third year, but in third year most people choose to live on site. Fourth year, I think as well, you have to move out. Femi might know about that.
Yeah.
So it's still college-owned accommodation, isn't it? Isn't it, Femi?
Oh yeah. It's all college owned, but it's just a flat.
Yeah, I guess the perk of having college-owned accommodation is like it's cheaper than renting privately. And in terms of ensuite, you can, if you want, particularly if you have any specific requirements, so whether that's like cultural faith or kind of access requirements of why you need an ensuite room, then you can get one for all 3 years. But most people tend to kind of have a mixture of rooms as they go through the years. We've got, was there anything specific that you did in interviews or specific thing you wrote in your application that you think helped you get placed?
For my second interview, I remember they asked me one question, and they drew like this, like a bunch of atoms and like some photons going through, and I was just like, they're like, derive this equation. I was like, where do I even begin? And I just started writing in really small handwriting on the top right hand of the paper, just a bunch of little equations. And then she's like, one of the professors stopped me and was like, oh, what's that one? I was like, I don't know, I just wrote it. And then it turns out that's the one that I had to work towards, but I didn't know it yet. But I was like proper scared. I was like, I wrote it in such a way that I didn't think they would see. And when they called me out, I was just sweating. But I feel like being like for sciencey subjects, it would be useful to do that. Like if you don't know exactly what you have to do with the presented information, just like try to jot down some equations that you think might apply to the situation, because I think it might help you along the way. Because that was like my third or fourth long pause in the interview, and I was feeling like I couldn't afford another long pause, so it kind of saved me there.
I think in one of my interviews, I mentioned in my personal statement some of my work experience with my MP, and for the other, I spoke to like some of the other students who'd had interviews, and they all kind of stuck to the same script, but they actually asked me about that. So I would say kind of, if you have mentioned something that's a bit kind of off-piste in your personal statement, be ready for them to maybe flag you up on it or ask about it, or be ready to kind of face what they have to tell you.
I think for me, in one of my interviews, we followed from the reading we got questioned along those types of reasoning by my tutor, and I followed that line of questioning as far as I could. But I think the ability to say, I don't really understand something, can you clarify or expand on an answer is very good, instead of just saying, oh, I don't know. It's more of a conversation. They want you to do well as well. It's not just, they don't want to see you fail because they want somebody they can teach. So it's more of a conversation with the tutor interviewing you as well.
We've got a few more questions about accommodation, so I might like group them together. Is there kitchen access that you can cook for yourself? What's the food at Mansfield like? How do you find the accommodation? What's it like? And yeah, okay, so we'll have those three questions: kitchen access, what's the food like, and what's the accommodation like?
In terms of kitchen access, usually there's about, I think it's 7 kitchens on site, with one of them being for people that have like particular needs when they cook. So yeah, depending on where your room is on site, you'll be closer to a kitchen. But yeah, you can access a kitchen and like you can cook for yourself if you really need to. And the food at Mansfield is solid. I think this is like the fact that everyone brings up is like Mansfield was like #1 out of all of the colleges for, was it vegetarian or vegan food in like 2 years ago or something like that. So if you're vegan or vegetarian, come to Mansfield. And then how are we funding? Is that one of the questions? How are we funding?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, I was going to ask that as a separate question, but the question was more like, how are you finding the accommodation? What's it like?
Oh, okay.
Nice? Is it old? Is it new? That kind of thing.
I guess there's a mixture of old and new. In my first year, I had like shared accommodation, but my room was really big, and some of the rooms have like 2 sets of beds, so you can have friends over. And then in my second year, I had like ensuite, really modern, and that was nice. And then this year I'm living off site, so I'm in a house. There's lots of variety, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me as well, like, I mean, food, I mostly cooked. But when I did go to hall, it was, the food was great. And like you have a Sunday roast every Sunday, so that's nice. And like accommodation wise, I mean, I thought the room was really good, and I think that also in terms of like rent, Mansfield is one of like I think like more affordable ones. So yeah.
I think I might have misunderstood the how do you find accommodation, and if the question was more how do you secure it, as in how do you find a room or a house to live in, if you go to Mansfield, then that's done through college. So as Aoife mentioned, there's a ballot, and depending on how high or how low you are, you get to pick a room, but you don't have to kind of find your own through like an estate agent or anything like that. It's all college owned accommodation that you get assigned or pick from on the basis of the ballot. I hope that's cleared it up. There was a question about funding. So how are you funding university, including accommodation, living expenses? Are you aware of any Mansfield bursaries, and kind of generally what sort of financial support is available?
I think that there's just a university-wide bursary, like it used to be called the Moritz-Hyman, but now it's called the Crankstrat Scholarship, that's available to you based on family income, which it would probably be useful to look into. I don't think Mansfield has any bursaries, but it does have hardship funds, which you can apply for, and you can like work during the vacations. And that's basically, like we're only like the terms are only 6 months of the year, so you can actually work the rest of the time, and probably save up money if you needed to.
I am funding university through like help from my parents, and then maintenance loan, and I would work in the holidays as well, so help supply that. And Mansfield do have £150. I don't know what would you call it, Sarah? Is it
like a grant for the academic?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that's it. Yeah. So there's an academic grant, so you can apply for up to £50 per term, and I use that for stuff like I needed textbooks for a language class, so I would spend the money on that. And I think it's just mainly academic needs. Like if you need to pay for like travel to get to internships and stuff like that, then you use that academic grant. So it was handy.
And there are some like travel grants that aren't academic as well, so you can apply for it to like So, for example, one of our ex-students got some money from that to go and do like a walking pilgrimage type thing. Just like things that college think could be worthwhile that aren't necessarily related to your subject and you might not have been able to afford otherwise. There is like lots of support from college, as well as kind of the main university bursaries, which is the main bulk of help that low-income students get. We have a question specifically for Eve. Do you have any specific advice for people applying for law?
I think for law, there's often like a lot of books, very generic law books. Like I think one's called Letters to a Law Student, which everybody who wants to apply to law reads. So I think having something unique on your personal statement, that's away from the generic law student personal statement, like filler almost. But something that you're really genuinely interested in, because your tutors want to teach someone who has as much passion for their subject as they do. So something you're really like genuinely interested in, and don't just read one book, have a look, explore deeper into your subject to really show that interest.
We've got a question. If you didn't go to Mansfield, what college would you have liked to go to?
I would pick St Anne's or St Cat's. Those two are like, they have nice, like really nice people, I'd say, and they're really near to the department as well. So.
And just because I applied initially to Brasenose, I think I'd say Brasenose, but as I said, after going to Mansfield, like I'm really glad I ended up where I am.
I think for me it would probably be Lady Margaret Hall, just because it's very pretty and it has lovely rooms that you can use.
I think for me it would be Wadham, because I've got quite a few friends and it was a lovely bop that I went to once.
And what kind of clubs or societies are you all involved in, kind of outside of your work?
So in terms of sports, there's like the college netball team, which is super chill but very fun, and you should definitely come. But also, like, my friends and I started our own writing society, which was actually very chill, and quite easy. And we just started hosting these writing nights, and people started showing up actually, and we would just sit there and talk about poems and stories and literature, and it was very fun.
So I'm on the IRO for Mansfield College, and I'm also on the exec for the Welsh Society, Cymdeithas Dafydd Gwelyn. So if you're a Welsh student, check it out. I would say like there's so much to do with college. Like I'm also on the netball team, but it's very chilled and like low commitment as well. So even if you're not sure in the first few weeks like how much you want to play or how much you want to do, it's very easy to kind of get a taste of everything.
I'm on the committee for Engineers Without Borders, and they do a lot with using engineering to tackle social injustice. So they do lots of water projects in like Peru and Nepal, and I think one of the projects this year is like using robotics to detect landmines. They do a lot of cool stuff. I'm also part of ACS. They put on a lot of good events, and I played a lot of badminton last year as well, and there's lots of tournaments called cuppers where so you can play against other colleges at particular sports, and it's a good way to meet new people.
I'm part of the Law Society and the Women in Law Society, and then this year I'm the president of Oxford First Gen Society for people who are the first in their family to go to uni, and we host like lots of dinners and pizza nights and get-togethers and do lots of access work for the inspiring the next lot to apply to Oxford.
That's great that you'll have lives outside of work. On that note, how do you kind of like balance your work with your social commitments? Because I know there's a kind of like a perception that all Oxford students do is work and there's like no time to have fun. So how have you kind of found balancing your work and extracurricular? I feel like I should go to Femi since he's squirming so much at that suggestion.
I'm just thinking, like, is there really a balance? Like, can we call it balance? It feels like very heavy on one side, but I guess you just like, I have this feeling like when I like, say I'm doing a lab report and it's like the night before, and I know this thing's due at 12 p.m. the next day, and I know that I'm staying up all night. I just don't stress. Like the stress just leaves my body because I know that eventually it's gonna get done. Like that's the mentality I have. Like, don't worry, it will get done. Therefore, I can do everything else until like whenever, because it will get done. So yeah, like I'm just chilling.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I was really bad with management of time or even work and balance. I think there was just this one day before my essay was due that I was intensely working the entire day, but I would not recommend that. I think, yeah, when I was at home, like during the last term in Trinity, I think I got used to, like, I actually like did it differently and I actually worked a little bit every day. And wow, would you believe that actually helped so much? But yeah, so I would just say, like, don't be, like stupid about it. Like I think we all know, like having sat through like our exams and stuff, how we should be managing our time. Not that we always like, follow the things that we're told or the advice we're given, but just do a little bit of work every day. And I don't know, like you actually kind of enjoy the work as well. So just do little bits every day.
We've got some fan mail. Hi, current students. I'm a fresher who'll be meeting you all next month, and I just wanted to say you're doing an amazing job. And for any students about to arrive, Mansfield is lovely. Applying there was a great decision. It's so friendly and lovely. So that's nice. I did have another question about like what kind of support is available for like managing, stress or like kind of more welfare provisions, because obviously it can be really stressful having lots of work and also just the adjustment of moving away from home. What kind of things are there in college but also in the wider university that are there to support you with that?
So I think like Hillary, which is like the second time that was at Oxford, Gail Leckie, our admissions tutor, ran these study skills sessions, and they were really helpful because she actually goes through, ways to actually like, get yourself to study and not procrastinate, but also like really practical things like how to make better notes and make notes more effectively, which was very helpful because I was not making very good notes until then. Which was really cool. But I also think that, college itself provides a really great environment for that. I think if you go to the library and everyone else is working, but you can still sit with your friends, but get a lot of work done. And like I said, you can sit in the grid, which is a bit more noisy sometimes, but it's still like a nice environment. And you still, you sit there all day, you do get like a little bit of work done, but yeah, it's nice.
I think for me, I found no matter who it is at college, there's always somebody to talk to. Like even yesterday, like I was on the phone for an hour with my tutor, whether it be like welfare or academic, or you're really stressed about something. There's like all the welfare tutors, there's peer support, and even all my friends at Mansfield, there's always somebody who's willing to listen and help you if you've got no matter what kind of problem it is, which is one of my favourite things about Mansfield.
Also, if you don't like talking to like humans, college also has 2 college cats and a college dog called Mish Mish, and you can take the dog out for walks, and then I feel like people are fighting for the cat's attention. Like people are buying little dreamies snacks to feed the cats to get them to love them. So if you don't want to talk to humans, you've got options.
Yeah, animal therapy.
Yeah.
So we have another question on that. Did your mental health decline throughout the year? How did you kind of find managing your mental health?
I think in the first few weeks, I'm not sure if I'd call it my mental health declining, but you do kind of, it's very easy to overwhelm yourself just with how busy you are. And kind of, I just found like my sleep schedule was no longer a schedule. It was just like, I was napping at like 11 a.m. because I'd like been awake, and it was very bad. So like, I do feel like if that does happen to you, it's kind of important to like, even if you just message your tutors being like, listen, having a bit of a bad day, I need a day of sleep. They are so understanding with anything like that. And like university wide, even there's stuff on hand if you need like to talk to someone, or like kind of therapy or anything like that. The uni itself, not just the college, if you want to go like wider than that, it's quite easy to talk to people. I would say those first few weeks, it felt like at the time I was pushing through, and it was like, oh, I need to get to the end of this term. But honestly, after that, it just went up from there.
How many times a week do you go out? Well, in pre-coronavirus times, of course. Please maintain social distancing.
In first year, I would say that I was like going out. Well, it depends what you would call going out. Like, say if I was going clubbing, it'd be like once a week, I guess, like, or once every 2 weeks maybe. But in first term, it was more like once a week. And then going out to see friends and like doing stuff that wasn't in college was like almost every day, like every other day maybe. Yeah, I feel like there's lots of opportunity. Like in first year at least, there's so much to do, and like there's always something to do. But in second year, I was just tired. Like I was just tired. I feel like an old man. Like I need to stay inside. Go out a bit, but not as much as first year.
What's the nightlife like in Oxford?
I think for the nightlife, I'm from Liverpool, so a very big city with a very good like nightlife. So I found going to Oxford, it was a lot smaller than what I was used to. But I think I told myself it's a different kind of fun, it's a different kind of night out to what I was used to. So you love it you love it in its own way, like a light up dance floor, which you wouldn't get in the north. But I miss it. Like you do grow to love it.
We have to trick ourselves into loving it. But I also wanted to say that like you don't have to like feel pressure to go out and like drink and stuff like that. There are lots of activities that are on offer, like, especially in college, that don't require you to like have to drink and stuff like that. So no pressure.
I'd say as well, it's quite easy to kind of just go out to the pub for a night with your friends, which like often you kind of end up in Wetherspoons or something, and you're like, I can't go further than here. Like I'm not gonna end up going out. And like that is completely fine, and like it is acceptable. Like don't feel like, oh my god, it's fresh. Like not so much this festive week, but you know, don't feel like there's a week where, oh, I have to go out every night this week, because genuinely it's very unlikely to happen. And like even a pub night sometimes is like just as good.
Yeah, and I mean, college also has these things called bobs, which is sort of like reminiscent of your school discos, you know, again, with like Eve said, which are its own kind of fun. But it is actually quite fun. It's a little bit cheesy and feels like high school, but it is fun. And it's nice that everyone from college and most, like, you know everyone. So, yeah.
Great. We've got just over 5 minutes left. So I don't know if there can be any more questions. I'll kind of keep an eye out on that. But does everyone want to kind of do one piece of advice, kind of as a way of wrapping up? And if there is another question, I'll pose it to you after we've done this. So for people who are thinking of applying, obviously it's September, so the UCAS deadline is in less than a month. What advice would you have for people who are applying, whether it's to your subject or just generally?
I would say if you're like on the edge and you're not sure if you're applying, or if you're like, but if it didn't really come into mind until you saw like maybe a couple of tweets from Mansfield Access about like live Q&As or whatever, just I'll just say just give it a go, just like no matter what. Like even if you're not 100% sure if you're going to get in, or if you feel like you're not fit for the place, just like just try, because you've got 4 other options. So it's not unlikely that you'll get 1 or 2 at least from the 4 other options. So you might as well just put Oxford down and just like give it a go.
I'd say for my subject as well, I kind of got caught up writing my personal statement, being like, oh my gosh, like, should I be sounding more Tory as I write this? Should I be sounding more like left wing or more right wing or more like, but honestly, your personal statement is your, like, I say this all the time, but is your personal statement, like, just be you on it, and they're gonna love that. And if it's your place to be there, then it's your place to be there. Like, don't go overthinking what they want you to be or anything, because they just want you to be you. That's very cheesy, I'm sorry.
I mean, I think, yeah, sort of related to that is just like, don't pressure yourself to be some kind of genius, or, you know, like the next person who, like, you know, brings about an intervention in gender theory. Just like, it's fine, you know, chill, you know, just do your essay, do the work you're given, read stuff that you're interested in. And yeah, like, be interested in your subject, be proactive in, like, you know, searching out stuff that you think is cool. But also, you know, they're not expecting the world from you. So don't put pressure on yourself to, you know, like, I don't know, do more than you're already doing.
I think for me, I tell you to look after yourself, because I know in my experience, I wanted to be at Oxford that much that I really put a lot of pressure and a lot of stress the entire way through the school year. And I think at the end of the day, it was a bit of a disadvantage, and I could have done better if I hadn't stressed myself out to the point that I did. So I'd look at it in a new perspective. It's not the end of the world, but I'm sure you'll all be amazing.
That was really good advice. Thank you. I'm just going to have a look and see if there are any final questions. Does anyone have any final words of wisdom before we leave? Doesn't seem like there's any questions. Okay. Well, if anyone does have any questions, we are online till 5 p.m, so we can give you a typed answer. It's not quite as good as being able to see all of our lovely faces, but you know, it'll have to do. Hopefully you found this useful, and yeah, do check out the rest of like the videos, kind of get to know a bit more about Mansfield, and if any questions arise, just put them in the Slido and we'll get back to you. Thank you so much to all the helpers for being willing to do this as well. But yeah, bye.